You are listening to Latinx America, a podcast focused on highlighting catalysts who are using, leveraging, or creating technology to help our community achieve more. With your host, Adriana Flores Ragade. Ariel, thank you so much for joining us at Latinx America. I am excited to learn a little bit about what Microverse is doing and also, most importantly, what got you to where you are. So can we start with your personal journey into tech?
Sure, yeah. Thank you so much for having me here today. So my name is Ariel, and I was born in Argentina. And when I was 12 years old, I got lucky because my parents decided to emigrate to Spain. And I always say that moment was a point of no return in my life because it taught me that I wasn't limited by the place where I had been born. And this is important because it's connected to what I'm doing today, where I'm helping people around the world be able to access great opportunities, professional opportunities, regardless of the countries where they come from. So when I moved to Spain, I ended up going to Madrid for college. I did telecommunications engineering, computer science, and immediately after that, I was crazy enough to decide to start my first company. I was naive enough to do it. And it was an amazing experience. It took me to San Francisco a few years later. And I got the chance to experience the Silicon Valley life. I lived there for 6 years. After a year and a half, we ended up selling the company that I had been running, that I started. We sold the company to Lonely Planet, the publisher, the travel guide publisher that I think publishes still 12 million books a year. And I worked for them for a few years, helping them revamp their company, transitioning from a publishing company to a digital company. And a year and a half ago, I decided to go after what my real passion is, which is education. And now I'm combining education and tech with Microverse, which is my new company.
So your first company, let's talk a little bit about that.
Mm-hmm.
What prompted you to launch it? What was the process like for you? You're now in your second company, yeah?
Mm-hmm. Yes, correct.
You launched your second company last year, but what was the process like, especially for those people that are thinking, wow, I want to take baby steps to launch my first one and maybe eventually do something like you and launch a second one?
Definitely. So an important thing is I didn't get to pick the idea because I had met someone that ended up becoming my co-founder that had an idea that he had developed in Chicago while he was studying there. He came back to Madrid and we started talking about it. We both loved traveling and he had this idea that he had been developing. I wasn't too convinced about it, but I knew that working with the right people is so important. As an entrepreneur, doing things alone, it's so hard. And so I think I picked that idea because I wanted to work with him. And even though the idea proved to be really hard to monetize and build a big business out of it, choosing him as my co-founder was probably the most important decision because that's what allowed me to really be able to stay focused, stay put to that idea for 5 years. And at the end, of course, choosing the right idea, choosing, everything well, it's important. But the most important thing is, to be perseverant and keep going day after day after day. And before you realize, in the words of Steve Jobs, the dots that you have created somehow connect. And when you look back, it's wow, that's amazing. So that's what happened to us. The idea, it was really, as a product, we did really well. We ended up getting to more than 1 million users around the world. We had users from almost every single country. And at some point, we had competitors that were doing much better than us in terms of fundraising, not in terms of revenue necessarily. But every investor that we talked to, this was after having raised a few rounds of funding in Europe first and then in San Francisco. And every VC, every investor told us, hey, it's not you. You have an amazing product, an amazing team. It's just this industry where you are, where our product was a travel guide, very focused on helping you plan your trip and getting you inspired for your trips. But we were the first company in the world offering offline maps. This was back in 2009, 2010, when Google Maps was just becoming to be a thing, but it only worked online. So we were offering to travelers around the world the opportunity to have all their information completely offline. And we were too far away from the moment where the transaction happens. You book a hotel, you book an activity. So it was really hard to monetize. And a lot of investors told us that from the beginning. And they were right. So when we tried to really, accelerate our learning, our capacity to grow, we realized that was this really hard ceiling there that we couldn't go through. So we ended up exploring the idea of getting, the company acquired. And we talked to 25 companies that we already had a relationship with. We ended up getting 16 of those companies interested. 8 of them did some kind of due diligence. 2 companies ended up making an offer. But the offer from Lonely Planet was not any of those 2. Surprisingly or not, 6 months earlier, I had met an entrepreneur that had introduced me to someone at Lonely Planet that had left her job at Lonely Planet, but sent a cold email to another person. They never got back to me. But the week I was about to sell the company in San Francisco, I got an email from the CEO of Lonely Planet telling me, hey, I am in San Francisco today and I would love to meet for dinner. You don't know me, but I know you guys and I want to talk. And I went for dinner with them. It was clear that we had a lot of common goals. It was a brand that we loved. So a week later, we were flying with my co-founder to Nashville, Tennessee to meet with them. And between kayaking, sushi, and a lot of brainstorming, they ended up making an offer. And it's not one of those Silicon Valley level success stories where, you made a lot of new millionaires in the neighborhood, but it's a success story where we were able to make our investors happy, our employees and our team members that had sacrificed a lot to make them happy too. The 2 co-founders, we ended up giving up a lot of what we could have gotten, but we saw this as a marathon, not as a sprint. And I mean, I couldn't have been like happier with our decision. It proved to be the right one, and a lot of investors that we ended up making happy then, they're now joining for the new company.
Well, and it's also the type of brand, the type of company, right? Lonely Planet and
Definitely, yes.
travel and some of the things that you've been doing, right? Travel's your passion.
Yeah, it depends who you talk to. If it's younger than 18 years old, they don't know what Lonely Planet is. No. Many people do. People that travel internationally, even if they're young, like I spent last year living in Asia actually, and moving a lot around Asia, and everywhere you saw the travel guides. And I know, I feel it made us feel really proud about joining efforts with that brand.
Well, my 6 and 9-year-olds who love to travel internationally, they know about Lonely.
Great! They're going to be really happy about it.
That's the bottom part of your demographics. But let's talk about how you transitioned then into Microverse. So, what did you learn from your first company, from the first try, and how did you apply your learning into your second venture?
That's a really good question. So when we sold the company to Lonely Planet, they had just relocated their headquarters from London to Nashville, Tennessee. And they were like struggling really, really hard to find technical talent for their team. And what we suggested was, what if we build a team remotely? What if we not just focus on hiring people in Nashville, but try to go even outside the US? After that decision was made, and it wasn't easy to convince them because working remotely as a company requires a lot of cultural changes in the way you communicate. But once I made that decision, we were able to hire a team of very senior developers very quickly. And I got the chance to manage that team, and we built the whole infrastructure that is supporting all the digital products of Lonely Planet today. That's like 150 to 200 million users a year, and it was built by this team. But around the time that happened, I think I saw 2 things outside Lonely Planet. Once, I had just came back from teaching at a University of Computer Science in Ngozi, a very, very small town in the middle of Burundi, in one of the poorest countries in the world. And I remember meeting a guy called Deo. And wow, like he was so brilliant, like always asking these great questions. It's like huge entrepreneurial drive. And I remember asking him, okay, what are you going to do once you graduate from computer science? And he told me, I'll probably end up managing the local cyber cafe. And, I had been spending a couple of months talking to Lonely Planet, and they were struggling to find talent. And this guy was super talented, but they were still very disconnected. And that probably drove me crazy. I wondered, like, how is it that we are, like, struggling to find talent for our team, even though there are millions of people there with a lot of potential disconnected from this? So when I suggested Lonely Planet to do this, I had recently met Sid Brandy. He's the founder and CEO of Gitlab. Gitlab has recently raised $165 million. They are a unicorn now. What's very special about them is that every single member of their team is working remotely. And Sid generously accepted to become my mentor a few years ago, and I've gotten to see how they went from 600 employees. All of them were working remotely from a different part of the world, and they're not an exception. There are other companies like InVision and Buffer, and those are just the ones that are doing a lot of noise and are very well known. But there are a lot of other players out there that are showing us that you can build amazing teams and cultures remotely. It requires a lot of changes, a lot of effort, but it's possible, and it gives you a double competitive advantage. It allows you to access a much bigger pool of talent, but it also gives you a superpower. And it's that people who work remotely, or at least that can partially work remotely from home, they stay in their jobs much longer because that flexibility in their lives is something that gives them much more harmony in their lives. So companies that can benefit and can take advantage and can adapt, they have a huge competitive advantage. GitLab has figured that out, and I try to do that with Lonely Planet. But at some point, I realized, wow, there is a huge opportunity because we are in this moment where I just came back last week from a conference in San Diego, the ASU GSV conference, and Tony Blair, the former Prime Minister of the UK, was there. And they were talking about how the world is going through all these challenges where innovation, technology, AI is accelerating how the world is changing, and how the people that is falling behind is afraid of those changes, right? And they were discussing the importance of education to help us with that, and how education has the power to both provide reskilling opportunities. So someone that before was maybe an accountant, if that ever becomes, or when that becomes, replaced by AI, how that person can get reskilled to become now a software developer. But at the same time, how we have the responsibility to, as educators, to not just teach technology or anything specific, but also how to help the world become global citizens, because this world is getting more and more connected, and Mexicans are not taking the jobs away from the US. It's actually automation and technology, but that's creating a lot of opportunities, and the winners of the future are going to be those that can benefit and can learn how to operate and work at the global level with multiple cultures and accents and religions, and who can learn to appreciate the advantage of having access to that diversity. So connecting the idea of remote work and seeing more and more people for the first time connected to the internet in Burundi, seeing what GitLab was doing, seeing what was going on in the US, I was like, this is such a beautiful and huge opportunity to prepare the world for them to become global citizens. And because I've been developing software for a long time, just doing it as a combination of teaching software while people learn as part of a distributed team with other cultures, that was like the perfect combination to me.
So, did you develop the curriculum yourself, or how does it work? So, tell us what Microverse is all about, how people can take advantage of it, and how it can hopefully close the gap not only here in Silicon Valley in terms of talent, but also empower people around the world.
Perfect. So we are a software engineering school as of today. We're going to be launching other things soon, but for now we are software engineering, and we basically take students from all around the world, and we train them for around 8 months in software engineering. Once they graduate, we help them connect with jobs. Often that leads to remote jobs, but there are multiple paths, and it depends on where the person is and what their priorities are. And after, only once they get a job, we charge them a percentage of their salary. And this is a new trend that we're seeing, where for the first time, learning institutions are getting aligned with the interests of the students too. So in our case, unless our students don't get a job first, we don't see a single cent. And I always like saying that we are the only school crazy enough to do this worldwide. We are the only school crazy enough to offer an income share agreement in every single country in the world. And the reason why we can do that, it's actually a win-win, because we, instead of hiring teachers and having to depend on that to deliver an experience that often a great educational experience is not so much about great content. You can access that for free. There are Harvard and MIT and Ariel Camus. It's all available for free. What's missing in online education is all the support, all the accountability that you get in a traditional college setting, but you don't get online. So we have managed to use peer-to-peer learning to provide that level of accountability and support, where students are working with each other 8 hours a day. This is a full-time program. It's very demanding. 8 to 10 hours a day. They are from their homes, and one might be in Liberia, the other one in Nigeria, the other one in Germany, but they are in a video conference 8 hours a day doing pair programming remotely, building projects together, and they operate as if they were working from as part of the real world distributed team. So they do daily stand-ups, they do weekly retrospective, they do co-reviews, and this allows us to teach them how to work with this, diversity of cultures and learning styles and everything in between. But at the same time, it gives us the superpower of holding them accountable and keeping them like really engaged in a way that allows us to take that cost down, so we can really take this advantage and invest in people and in places that no one else had access to before. And we already have full-time students in 53 countries around the world.
So, but let's go back to curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
How do you know that this is good curriculum, that it's been vetted, that is going to end up training the students the way you want to train?
What we do is we talk to potential employers, companies. We use the expertise of our team that has been in the tech industry for like 10, 15 years already to analyze what the market is demanding, and based on that, choose what are the technologies that we think will be in the highest demand in the short term. However, there are two things that we think are really important. One is whatever language we are training people for today, most likely they're not going to be using it 5 years from now. So it's really important that we teach our students not Ruby on Rails, or Python, but we teach them how to learn, and so they can adapt and they can always be learning new things, so they can be part of this new world that is changing so fast. The other part of that is that I think in the past 10 years, we have seen something fascinating where companies like Coursera, FreeCodeCamp, big universities in the US, they made all their content available for free. And that was a necessary step, but I would call that the first wave of innovation in the edtech space. But now content has become a commodity. And what we have to do is we have to build the layers around that content to provide what I was just saying, all the accountability or the support. So what we do is we identify what are the technologies, the languages, the frameworks that we think are going to be in the highest demand. We combine that with a lot of soft skills through this like peer-to-peer work. And then we build a series of projects that you have to go through using content that we recommend that you read and you go through that we find somewhere else. So it's all curated content.
Curate.
Exactly, yes.
Okay, no, that's great. And did you have a cohort already go through your program? And what are they doing? How are they doing? What are they saying?
So the first cohort was as a scrappy startup last year. What we did is we took 2 students full-time first to validate that just getting them to work together the whole day was going to keep them much more engaged than if they were like alone. That went pretty well. So a month later, we added 2 more students, and we got the first 2 students to become mentors of the first ones. That went really well because it allowed us to uncover motivational difficulties that sometimes, as the administrators of the schools, because they can't spend so much one-on-one time with each student, they miss. But having your mentor being a peer that is going through a similar experience or that recently went through that experience, that worked really well. So we kept adding 2 for people for a few months last year, and that's what we call our first cohort. That was around like 10, 12 people, and so far it has been going really well. We had students working from Latin America, working remotely for companies in the US and in Canada, making 2 to 4x what they were making before. We have a student from Asia working remotely for a company in Poland, making 2x what he was making before. We have a student from Nigeria working for a company in the US who is making 8x what he was making before Microverse. We recently got the first offer from Microsoft, making an absurd amount of money from Kenya that we feel super proud of. We also had students that decided, for example, to take a local internship. And sometimes people might think that we will force them to take a job that pays them well, so they pay us a percentage of their salary and we make money. And we do just the opposite. We told this person, your priority right now is to get experience. So if that experience can come from an unpaid local internship and you can sustain yourself financially, for the 3 months of the internship, that's going to be amazing because that de-risks your profile as a developer, and it's going to be much easier for you 3 months later or 6 months later to get a job that pays much better. That's what he did, and he just got a job offer last week for a company in Europe, and he ended up choosing a company where, for example, he had another offer with better salary, but he ended up going for a lower salary with a company that was famous for offering a great mentorship program. So we're always reminding people that we will never force them to take a job. We will give them our best advice, not from a financial point of view, but from what we think will be their best career path. And we will go with them through that career path. So they can, for example, take an internship. 3 months later, they come back to us. We help them get a full-time job. They start paying a percentage of their salary. A year later, they can come back. Now they're a mid-level developer. They can access a much better position. We help them again. And what they pay back increases as their career improves.
So when you say what they pay back, that's your ROI. So what is the
Perfect.
cost?
So the program costs $15,000, and they pay 15% of their monthly salary once they start making at least $1,000 a month. So, for example, for people, we have a few students in the U.S., but we definitely don't focus in the U.S. We think that the big opportunities in emerging and developing countries. In the U.S., of course, like $1,000 a month is not going to make a big difference, but we are seeing salaries above $65,000 a year. But $1,000 a month for someone maybe in Nigeria or Bangladesh, it's significantly above the average salaries locally. So that means that if they're making less than that, we didn't yet deliver our promise. That's fine. They don't have to pay us anything. Once they're making at least 1,000, they start paying back 15% of their monthly salary. Once they get to the cap of $15,000, they don't have to pay us anything and anything else. And if for any reason they get fired or they quit to look for a new job in the middle of their career, they can just let us know. We put the payment on pause. We help them again find a new position. Once they start getting paid again, they continue paying us.
But here in Silicon Valley, or here in the States too, I just interviewed a software engineer, and she went the traditional route and had experiences with boot camps as well. But she's one of she calls herself a unicorn because you don't have that many Latinas in tech.
Uh-huh.
Could someone in the US also apply to the program and benefit from the curriculum? And I'm going to call them wraparound services, because what you're talking about in a traditional higher education institution, they're called wraparound services: the coaching, the job placement, a lot of the different things that you offer that are different from just we're making our content, high quality content available to you, like Coursera does, right? So could someone in the US take advantage of what you're offering, and what's your selection process like?
Perfect. So yes, we take students from every single country around the world. We do have students in Canada and in the US, so they can apply to join. The difference, I guess, with the bootcamp is that a bootcamp traditionally has around 500 hours of learning. Ours is around 1,500, so it's like 3 times the length. So it sits between a bootcamp and a college degree in that sense. And the other thing is, we don't just provide the coaching at the end, but we have a really strong system for student success where we deal with motivational, pedagogical issues, collaboration issues, even financial issues. So when you go to any school, I guess you see 3 things, right? You have the teachers that are like delivering that experience, but they also have a lot to do in keeping students motivated and engaged. You also have normally like a team of psychologists and social workers who are there, like the student success team, like available for all those issues that are not necessarily academical. But also, you could say that you have partners that are like, creating the books and the lessons, the textbooks for the school. Like the teacher is not necessarily writing all that content by herself or himself. They're using books. So in that sense, we're doing a similar thing where we are taking online books, and that's the content that we suggest students use. But then we still think that the role of the teacher as the one that transfers the knowledge, that's highly scalable, but the role of the teacher being the one that keeps you engaged, motivated, supported, that's what we do with our student success team. So we are definitely not a conventional school, but we're not just a wraparound in that sense. Now, that being said, we offer this to every single person in the world. But you could argue that, in the US, there are like plenty of opportunities because you have college, you have great colleges, you have a lot of colleges, you have a lot of boot camps. There are like financing options. You can get a loan. It's a country where like getting loans for better or for worse, like it's a normal thing, but at least you have access to them. In many other countries, the idea of a loan, it's just unthinkable. Like when you think about a loan, you think about a shark loan, right? And when we come to those countries and we say, hey, we won't charge you, this is not a loan, an income share agreement is not a loan, you only pay if you get a job making at least $1,000 a month, that's much more, compelling to them, statistically speaking, than to someone in the US.
That makes sense. Although I really like the process, the motivation that you're integrating as part of the curriculum, because I think that helps anyone.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I always say that our superpower is to get someone that already, is determined to become a developer, but maybe can put 2-3 hours a day learning from home, alone, in front of a computer. Our superpower is that person to make them learn for 8 to 10 hours a day, 5 to 6 days a week for 8 months in a row. Like, and our dropout rate is below 10%. We're really good at making sure that nothing stops our students. And you asked about the admissions process, and that's something that we are really proud of because we receive more than 10,000 applicants every single month. And we look for the best out there. We look for the most talented individuals. We look for, people who are super determined. And once we accept students and we measure our acceptance rate, it's only 0.3%. So the reason for that, it's two actually. One is one that we feel really sad about is people might not have the access to, an English education that we require to join our program. Their internet connection might not be as good as it's necessary for a remote position. Maybe they cannot afford to spend 8 hours a day for 8 months without another source of income, right? So unfortunately, until recently, we had to let them out. The other part of that is because we are really strict when it comes to filtering, not necessarily for technical skills, which we do too, but also for all those soft skills that we were talking about at the beginning. And what we do, and we only have one person doing admissions for 10,000 applicants. Okay, the reason why we can do that is because these peer-to-peer mechanisms that I was talking about, we even apply them to admissions. So we have applicants who are working with other applicants and leaving peer reviews of each other, and we use that peer review system to decide who gets in and who doesn't. That works spectacularly well. It's really, really hard to do. Like peer-to-peer learning, collaborative learning is one of the hardest things to do in education. And we believe that the only way to do it well is if it becomes part of your DNA from the beginning. I can confidently say that we are the best school at peer-to-peer learning in the world, and we are just getting started. But I also mentioned that there is another side of this story that we don't control, like people that can't access, an English education or a good internet connection. So what we're trying to do now is we're partnering with companies that are willing to take this risk with us up front, so we can offer English training to people that have showed that they have the intellectual capacity and the determination to be great developers or designers some days or project managers, and we can offer them this English training at no upfront cost. We haven't announced this yet, and we're still in the process of working with several partners, but something that we did announce last week for the first time that we're super excited about is the Coded by Her initiative. And the way we like to say it is we want to work and to help build a world where as much code is being coded by her as by him, right? That's why the initiative is called Coded by Her. And what we do is we are currently in this initial pilot offering stipends for living expenses to women, to 40 women around the world. So if they get accepted into our program, we can help them with this small expenses that will allow them to support or provide some kind of financial support for their families while they're going through our program. We can pay for things such as childcare, or to upgrade their internet connection, or to, if they have to repair the computer or get a better microphone. In some cases, if we know, for example, that a couple of $100 a month, just, a stable source of income, even if little, in some parts of the world, that can go a really long way. So we offer, for example, let's say $150 for 6 months, so you can have that extra support. And we know this is just, the beginning, and of course, this is not going to fix the world, but we're hoping that we can use this to start showing with data that with little help in little amounts of money, what seems like little to us, in other places can make a big difference. And if you measure it in terms of impact by measuring the new salaries that these people will get and how much more additional income that will bring in the 40 years of their professional career, the value value that creates. And because these people now, they don't have to leave their communities, so that money will impact their communities. It will inspire them, it will help them. We think this will have a huge impact, and we are already talking to other foundations and investors so we can do this at scale.
That's great. How can people listening join your efforts? Obviously, if you're asking for money, if you're out there. You mentioned you're working with investors. We do have a few investors that I know listen, and but mentors. What are you looking for? What's your call to action for some of the people that are listening?
Well, first of all, if there's anyone that wants to get into a tech career, you can go to www.microverse.org and you can apply. It's a pretty straightforward process. And if you have any question, you can just let us know. The questions about the living stipends and applying to them, it's just part of the application process. So if they're interested in that, they will be asked to provide some information to apply for that. We're currently hiring for 3 positions. We are hiring for a second person for our curriculum team. It's not so much about creating content. It's about creating, everything we do is based on self-paced, mastery learning, and project-based learning. So we are trying to create a learning environment that actually looks exactly the same as if we were working for a real company. And part of that is creating projects that have been designed with a pedagogic, instructional design framework behind it, but also with a scope and a setting that looks exactly like something you will build for a client. So we're hiring a second person to help us keep improving our projects. We're also hiring career coaches, anyone that has experience helping with technical preparation for interviews, from helping prepare resumes and LinkedIn profiles and portfolios, which we already do, but we are increasing the size of our team, to helping prepare people for the behavioral questions, system design questions, technical questions, or deciding which jobs to apply to and how to negotiate salary offers. Those are all services that we provide to all our students, and at no upfront cost. We're looking for people for that team. And last but not least, we are also growing our student success team. So this looks pretty much like a technical customer success team, where we have really strong KPIs on what we consider customer success or student success. Often it looks more like a SaaS than just a traditional education. At the end, the 2 main metrics that we look at is how likely is for someone to make it to the end of our program, how likely is for someone to get a job getting paid at least this amount. And we're looking for people that have the capacity to think at scale and in a very process-driven way, while at the same time having the empathy and capacity to approach the students one-on-one. So in the words of Paul Graham, we can do things that don't scale right now, so we can learn from them to design the systems and alerts that allows us to be more proactive and not so reactive with the students. And finally, in terms of investors, we just closed our first round. It went wonderfully well. Fundraising is always really hard. This is not the first time that I do it. And it took me 4 weeks to close this round. We ended up getting so much more interest than what we were actually trying to raise. So it didn't make sense to keep raising at that valuation. We said, okay, let's stop here. We're focusing on the new hires now and putting a few new processes in place at the company. And we're going to be fundraising again in a couple of months. So anyone who is interested in the space, anyone that has a combination of wanting to put capital to work on education that has a huge return on investment, with also something that has a huge potential for impact at a global scale, we're always happy to have conversations and find new people that we can work with.
Great. And I know that there are some VCs out there that are more focused on the social impact side.
Definitely.
So looking for those would be key. Let's go back to you. What's the best advice you've ever received in your life? And what's the worst advice?
The best advice. I think in my first job as a software developer, it's not the first time I had a boss as a software developer. I was 20 years old in my final days of college. And I remember 2 important lessons that I learned today. One that I give to a lot of our developers or students, and one that applies to every entrepreneur. And is that the worst thing you can see in a software developer is someone that, well, not the worst, but this is a red flag. Someone that is afraid of throwing code away. Someone that has built something and they want to tweak it to see if we can fix something, instead of just throwing it away and starting from scratch. And often the difficult part is thinking about the solution and the design, not so much the implementation. And that takes me to the next piece, which is, as entrepreneurs, we often think that technology is a solution to the problems, and we jump into building, software and building tools because we imagine this product. And I'm a developer myself, and I've been working as a product manager for many years, so I love beautiful products. But at Microverse, we have built everything until today using existing tools. So our stack is not Ruby and JavaScript and React. Our stack is Airtable and Zapier and Slack. And it wasn't until a couple of months ago that we started building tiny pieces that are critical now that we have very well-defined processes and extracted them into software, because building software is not expensive. What's really expensive is changing and maintaining. And if that makes you slower as an entrepreneur, the last thing you want to do is to limit your capacity to learn. And building software often leads you to minimizing your learning capacity.
Thank you. Who has influenced you the most, and who are some of the people that you admire and follow?
I've heard that question asked so many times, and every time I wonder myself who those will be. And I don't think I can answer with just one name. I think that different people has even meant different things, and you see people who can be super influential in a given moment, just going, from the most recent to, even like Tony Blair in the conference last week, seeing someone that has experience operating at that level of, in a global way, but a little bit less in the spotlight, and seeing how they can, speak more freely now, and hearing how they are approaching all this massive challenge that we're going through as society from an educational point of view. That was really inspiring. And I hope I can take that energy that he was being able to communicate and take it back to our students. But I think I also mentioned my first boss, right? And he had a lot of influence. I think a lot of the teachers that I had when I was a kid, this was a lot of the conversations we had this past week in San Diego, was the role of the teacher is not so much, and this applies, by the way, from kindergarten to, a PhD, is often not so much to give us the knowledge, but to give us the confidence to believe that we can do it. Right. And I think I had so many people when I was a kid, that starting from my parents, which I'm so grateful to some of the students that I had in elementary school, middle school, and university, that made me think that I could do it, even though we all have moments of self-doubt. So I think each one of those persons, each one of those people, have been really influential to me.
What are the next steps for you, personally or professionally? Like on the personal side, what next country are you going to travel to?
Good.
We're doing this interview. He's doing this interview from El Salvador, I should mention.
Yeah. So my journey, as I said, I started in Argentina, moved to Spain, US, Africa, Southeast Asia, and lately our entire team is completely distributed around the world, because we have to do dog fooding, and it's both a personal and professional journey that is so exciting and full of possibilities. So I spent the last 3 months fundraising from Barcelona, where half of my family lives. And we always say, this is very corny, but we call this year the Tour of Love, where we are taking advantage with my fiance of this flexibility to work remotely, so we can be in the place where we think we can get most value at any time. This first 3 months, we're fundraising all around the world. We had investors in the US, but also in Latin America, Europe, Australia. So it didn't matter where we were. So we were where we had people that we loved. And now we're in El Salvador, where she is originally from. Her mom is from here. So we're going to be here. And we're actually bringing most of the team members of the company, bringing them together physically in El Salvador. And we're going to be working, together, but also going to the beach and surfing and doing coffee tasting. And in June, I'll be back in San Francisco probably for the rest of the year, doing fundraising. I consider San Francisco my home. But just going through this journey of, freeing my mind from thinking that I had to be in a place to learning that I can be anywhere, I think that's fascinating. And I really wish, and I hope that more people can start seeing that, because the process or the change starts in their minds. Of course, then there is a financial side to that. There is an immigratory point to that that we cannot ignore. But it starts in your own head. And the hardest first step is that first one. But once you do it, it's full of possibilities. So I'm super excited about continuing exploring what this look like in terms of somebody starting a family. Are we going to continue with this life where we don't have just one home, we have two or three, or what are we going to do exactly?
I see that as something that I hear many people say now, and it's not just so much. It's what makes you happy, right? And how you can have an impact while you yourself are happy. So I look forward to continuing to follow your path,
Thank you.
and I wish you the best. And let me know when you're back in San Francisco. But thank you so much for taking the time to share your story with our audience.
Thank you, and I'm looking forward to seeing you soon in San Francisco too.
Thanks for joining us today. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook at Latinx America and on Twitter at America Latinx, or email any questions or ideas to latinxamerica@gmail.com. Gracias y hasta la próxima semana.